You are listening to the Enormocast.
I've been obsessing with the name Otaki since Sportiva released the slick blue shoe a couple years ago. Rhymes with souvlaki. In Japanese, it apparently means cascade. And there's an old Maori town in New Zealand called Otaki. What exactly are you up to, Sportiva? So in the spirit of etymological adventure, I started climbing in them despite my unsavory fetish for the caress of a slightly worn pair of Miras. And I gotta say, for sport climbing and really techie trad, I'm sold. I'm also sold on the name of the only color choice, Blue Flame. Cha-cha. But mostly, I smile at the comfort to performance ratio. Like any tightly fit shoe, a pair of Otakis are not exactly a lavender bubble bath, but of course with Sportiva's dedication to the craft, the Otakis slide on without any annoying stitch bumps and hot spots and remain tight where it matters. So if you want performance, perfect fit, and a shoe that rhymes with savory skewered meats, check out the Otaki at Sportiva.com or your favorite local shop. Kaliarezzi. Does your neck hurt playing someone else's project? Does your partner get in way over his head even on the warm-ups? Does the phrase, "I'll just do this move one more time," make your eyeballs spin? Then let Belay Specs fight for you.
When my boyfriend started falling lower and lower on his project, Belay Specs saved my neck and got me a new boyfriend.
Belayer neck pain, also known as BNP, can interfere with work, play, family, and snapping your head around at the gym to check out those abs. And you have rights, which are being crushed every time your partner yells take. So if your neck has been injured in an epic belay session, go to belayspecs.com to see if you qualify for a pair of belay specs and to get what you deserve. Enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount. Belay Specs is not licensed to give legal advice to anyone. Results may vary by steepness. If Belay Specs cause you to trip, fall down, run into a door, nausea, dry mouth, you're probably too high to climb to begin with.
All right, we good? We done here? Does anybody want to get a beer?
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
a
big
house. We
place,
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is September 15th, 2019, about 10:30 at night here in Colorado, and this is episode 183 of the Enormocast, a conversation with legend Jim Donini. And I don't think I've gotten more requests for anybody else to be on the show, and I don't know exactly why it's taken so long, frankly, but, you know, things just have to line up, and I got in touch with Jim recently, and he was totally game, and so we finally sat down this summer at the trade show. This one's been sitting in the hopper for a little bit, partially because I was waiting for him to come back from yet another trip to the Karakoram to release it. Not sure why. Could have been released while he was gone, but yeah, he turned 76 in Pakistan this year on an expedition, which is, you know, that alone is reason to talk to a guy. But he's got a 55-year climbing career. And, you know, I kind of think of him as sort of this blue-collar alpinist. He has just been banging it out, getting it done for so long. It's, you know, it's like the mailman. He's just there delivering all the time, year after year after year, and he's revered by multiple generations of alpinists. I think his reputation was originally sealed by being one of the early climbers down in Patagonia, at least early after the era of the big expeditions with support crews and things like that, when just a couple, 3 guys would go down there and basically sit in the woods for 6-8 weeks or longer waiting for weather to get up on those things. Before El Chaltán existed, before there was really any climbing scene whatsoever down there, Jim was down there and did a very important first ascent of Torre Egger, which revealed the lie that was the original ascent of Cerro Torre. But he's got a vast resume all over the world, concentrating in the Karakoram in Pakistan, Alaska, but he's got first ascents on every continent. So the guy's just been there banging it out forever. A lot of wisdom, but he's also a pragmatist, and his frankness was actually really rewarding at the end of this interview. I thought that I'd sat down with a guy that doesn't put up with much bullshit, which was actually really cool. And I spoke with Jim this morning. I wanted to get an update about his expedition to the Karakoram this summer, and he returned safely, but they did have one incident where a climber was choppered out with injury, expected to make full recovery, and like so many expeditions, they got there, the weather was good, then it turned to crap, and they didn't get a lot done. But Jim did have a birthday cake up there on the glacier, turning 76, so congratulations to you, Mr. Donini. And I hope you guys dig this one as much as I did when I recorded it. When you think about it, is there another gear company so dedicated to outfitting climbers from head to toe as Black Diamond? They've got lightweight modern helmets and headlamps for your pointy head, high-performance apparel to wrap that sweet climber bod you've been cultivating, all the way down to their line of advanced climbing shoes for those tender piggies. They've got crash pads for the pad sniffers, the best protection money can buy for the trad dads, ice tools for the masochists. Pitons, haul bags, portal ledges, backpacks, draws, beaners, harnesses, tents, probes, skis, poles, and even the signature Enormocast rhinestone-studded unisex microfleece G-string. Well, no, that doesn't exist yet, despite me stuffing the suggestion box every chance I get. Hit me up, BD. That's money just sitting on the table. So next time you're shopping for, well, nearly anything a climber could want, honor the generations of weary Black Diamond engineers poring over AutoCAD in their cubicles when they'd much rather be climbing. And go to blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop to see the fruits of their dedicated labor. And remember, Black Diamond is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast.
All right, so you have a trip coming up, and that we're at the Outdoor Retailer Show, and you came down to make some connections and get ready for this trip. So what do you have coming up?
Well, I went last year to the Karakoram, and I've fallen back in love with the Karakoram. 1978, of course, I went there with Jeff Lowe, George Lowe, and Michael Kennedy. We had our epic climb on Laytok, and still one of the most memorable climbs in my career. And even though we didn't summit, I think it was, in some ways, the most memorable climb I've ever done. To me, alpine climbing is the body of work you do, is the climbing that you do. And you always want that to end in a summit. But if it doesn't end in a summit, it's the body of work you've done to get to that point that makes the climb. So when you do 98% of a climb and you have to come down for the reasons that we did, to me, it wasn't a failure. It was a failure to get to, we didn't get to the top. But the 26 days we shared and the getting back down alive, all four of us, is still crystal clear in my mind. And it's, it was the most emotional, the most difficult in terms of what it did to my body. It took me a year to recover. And I really learned a lot about partnerships and how incredibly important they are in alpine climbing. Well, anyway, Thomas Huber has become a good friend because he has been trying to put the finishing touches on the north side of Laytok. And in 2016, he invited me to go there and hang out and spend some time. And I got George Lowe to go, two of the Laytok teams. So we went. And then George and I had a third climber with us, Tom Engelbach from Boulder, younger guy. And we almost did a new route on a 20,000-foot peak nearby while they were working on Laytok. And I fell back in love with the Cirque, the Laytok Cirque. To me, I've been on 7 continents. I've been to 60 countries. I've been in a lot of mountain areas. And the most beautiful, incredible cirque on the planet is the Lake Talk Ogre Cirque. Second would be the Tory Fitzroy Cirque.
Right.
And you have these Lake Talk 3 marching together, Lake Talk 3, Lake Talk 1, Ogre 2, and the Ogre. And those peaks, they're shoulder to shoulder. They comprise the most difficult alpine climbing in the world, the most difficult peaks to get to the summit by any route. And, I'm there thinking, God, I'd like to get my wife to go and see this place. She's a good rock climber, but she doesn't do the alpine or that sort of climbing. So I thought what I'll do is I'll put together a trek. So I did. And in 2017, I got 20 people to sign up for a trek. I designed it to go up the Biafo Glacier. I've been part way up the Biafo with Jack Tackle in 1993 when we nearly did the first ascent of Uzunbrock. But I hadn't been past that point. So the idea was to go all the way up to Biafo, to Snow Lake, cross Snow Lake, up over Simla Pass, and down into the Lake Talk Cirque and out. It's a 200-kilometer trek. And on the way out, I was timed it to meet Tomas and his team and then the rest of the trekkers were going out. I was going to stay behind for a couple of weeks, which is what I did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, get these people signed up. And little did I know, I had done a lot of that trek, but I hadn't done the Snow Lake, the Upper Biafo, Simla Pass. And if I had known what that was going to be like, I probably wouldn't have done it. But nobody died. Nobody even got hurt. But it was sketchy.
Right.
It was sketchy. It wasn't a trek like in Nepal where you have a tea house every so often and you have groomed trails. In fact, two of the people with me, Tim and Laura Kudo, are good climber skiers, and they've been on a couple treks. And they did the Annapurna Sanctuary Trek and the Everest Base Camp Trek. And they said, those are like bunny slopes. Your trek was a double black diamond.
Right.
But anyway, I got to the Upper Biafo, and I went, oh, my God. I started looking at all the Sulenbrock and the Solo Towers and Broad Tower. All these towers are next to each other on a flat glacier where you can have a base camp on dirt, on terra firma, and walk across a flat glacier and have a 3,000-foot ice climb or rock climb right there.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of it hadn't been done. I said, okay, I'm going to design a trip for next year where it's going to be a climber's camp. Because it's only a 4-day march. It would have been 5 days for trekkers, but 4 days for climbers to go from Ascoli to where I wanted to put the base camp.
Right.
So that's what I've done.
Okay.
So we're going to go in a few weeks, and I've got 8 climbers. And the idea was we're sharing all the base camp, and we have it's going to be a palatial base camp with a cooking tent and eating tent and chairs and tables. And then we'll have 4 teams of 2, and we just go out and have at it.
Right.
We'll be in base camp for 5 weeks.
Sick.
And I got 8 climbers to sign up. That's 4 teams of 2.
So you've got it's like cragging in the. Not as simple as that, but it sounds like you can have multiple objectives, do different things over the 5 weeks.
Right. Well, there's like Jay Smith's going, and he has a younger partner. We're all Jay and myself, and then we're all in the. We always have younger partners because we can't find anybody our age.
Yeah.
To pick on.
That's already happening to me, and I'm only 48.
Yeah, and there's everything from capsized rock climbs. There's a beautiful looking 2,500-foot ice runnel, and then there's a couple peaks. Sulenbrock and Uzunbrock are 6,500-meter peaks. They're just under 6,500 meters, which is like 21.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're just under 6,500 meters, you don't need a climbing permit.
Okay.
And they each been done only once. A Japanese team on Sulenbrock and a Slovenian team on Uzunbrock. So there's still new routes to do on those bigger peaks, and then there's first ascents to do in these towers.
Right.
So it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, but last year when I told my wife, okay, I turned 75 on the trek last year.
Okay.
I'm turning 76 on this climb, and I'm thinking, maybe I don't know anyone else my age is crazy enough to. Yeah, a lot of people my age rock climb, but doing alpine climbing. So I said, am I fooling myself? And I told my wife when I did the trek, it's probably the last time I go to the Karakoram, but lo and behold, I'm down in Patagonia. We spend the winters down there. I have a little house in Patagonia. I'm thinking, I feel pretty good. And one more year.
Okay.
So I put this together, and I told my wife, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be there gone for 7 weeks. And then next year we'll go to Europe, or maybe go to Africa. And that was a promise. But again, I promised her the same thing to you last year.
Yeah, is it in writing anywhere? Have you signed any sort of contract?
Writing, a tablet of blood with, my blood on a tablet.
Right.
No, it's not. It's not written down anywhere in blood. So who knows?
Right.
1 year at a time.
Well, I guess we'll get into that kind of leads me to a bigger question in my mind is what is it that's continuing to drive you to do these mountains and, put yourself at risk again. And, why are the dreams keep coming in terms of these big peaks in your mind? Have you ever, are you the kind of person that reflects on the sort of mountain addiction or anything like that?
I don't reflect on it, but I do reflect on it because people ask me all the time.
Yeah.
Because when you're a certain, I can't find people 10 years younger than me that are doing what I'm doing, and people wonder. I'm a barometer for people, and I think I'm the tip of the iceberg of what's happening in the way we treat aging. Years ago, people said, okay, you at a certain age, you stop doing a certain thing and you get on with your life. You don't do that because you're at a certain age.
Sure.
We're not looking at that now. People, they're older and older people climbing really hard.
Right.
Rab Carrington, you know who he is?
No.
He's a British climber that started the company Rab.
Okay, yeah.
And I climbed with him in Patagonia in the early 70s. He's a little bit younger. But he sold Rab. He was always a good climber. But he started this company in England and he got really involved with it. And when he was 58, he sold the company. And then all of a sudden he had time to train. So when he was 60, he did his first 8A.
Oh, right on.
At 60. Because he was able to train. And so we're treating aging differently. And and I'm out there sort of the barometer for people because they're younger than me and they're going, well, if he can do it, maybe I have a few more years.
Sure.
But, I never would have thought 20 years ago that at 75 I'd be going back to the Karakoram, maybe in a trekking way, but to go climbing.
Mm-hmm.
But every year, I feel okay. And I think that I've been blessed with a genetic situation where I've never had a joint issue. I have zero issues with my hips, my knee, and all. Like Jay Smith is still a super strong climber, but he has arthritis, so he's had 2 shoulder surgeries, back surgery, and that really limits and slows people down. And it slows them down. They can't train because they're coming back from surgery. And then when people can't train, not Jay, he's different. He's still going strong. But all of a sudden they put on a few pounds and then it's hard to get back into the fray.
Right.
I've never had that issue. I can still run down a hill with a pack on and my knees don't hurt.
Wow.
So I think
that's amazing.
I look at 3 things that there's genetics, there's lifestyle, and there's luck. And only one of those things you can control is your lifestyle.
Right.
You can be blessed with great genetics and have a shitty lifestyle. We know who they are.
Right.
And that's not good. Or you can have really good lifestyle and all of a sudden, something happens because of genetics. So the genetic part for me is my joints. They haven't flared up. And I've never been injured.
Okay. That's a good run.
Yeah, that's the luck.
Yeah, that's the luck, right.
And the other thing, surviving as many expeditions, maybe 40 real expeditions over the years,
mm-hmm.
and still being here when so many people have come to grief. Well, I think that's partly because of judgment and planning. But let's face it, if you're going to push the alpine envelope that long in those kind of places, no matter how good you are at judging the route and the objective dangers therein, or planning your route, you need a little bit of luck too, because we all know some of the people that have passed on that had super good judgment. Alex Lowe comes to mind, and just was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
So a little luck has to become, has to play in there.
Yeah, I mean, or a lot. I mean, it feels like, there's been a lot of talk about how it's a little bit of a roll of the dice and putting yourself in the realm, in the arena over and over again, sort of lessens your odds, and yet here you are. Someone who's been in the arena almost nonstop, right, for however many years.
Yeah, and you look at that Sirac and you go, it doesn't look like anything comes off that very often, but it does. And I'm only going to be under for half an hour, and roll the dice a little bit, but you have to be reasonable about picking routes,
right?
Because obviously there's some routes that have such high objective danger that if you kept doing those kinds of routes, you're not going to be around for very long.
Right.
So I always try and pick a line that makes some sense. But then I always know that, people ask me if I had a close call, certainly. And probably my closest call is one I don't even know about.
Right.
I was probably standing someplace and walked around a ridge, and then where I was standing was hit by a Sirac. I don't know.
Sure.
You never know. And, but here I am. And, I never worry about alpine climbing because I think that I plan it to the point where I look at the route and I think, okay, that's a good line and has reasonable objective dangers, and I pick the time I'm going to do it, and I think that I've got everything so prepared that I'm not nervous about the climb.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes get more nervous about climbs that have already been done. Because then I'll hear about, for example, years ago when I first started climbing in Yosemite in 1971, I did an early ascent of the Salafé Wall. I was a budding new wall climber. And the Salafé Wall in 1971 hadn't been done that many times. And I remember as a young climber hearing that Leighton Core had been in the ear pitch and freaked out in the ear because it was a Bombay chimney. Well, I went with a friend of mine who was the aid specialist, and I was the free specialist. So I did most of the free climbing pitches, and he did most of the aid pitches. So I knew all the way that I had to lead the ear. Mm-hmm. And you could see it looming above you, as you're climbing up. It took us a couple of days to get there. And all the time I'm thinking, oh, God, there's the ear. It's getting closer. Right. Leighton Core freaked out, and I get into the ear, and it's anticlimactic. There's actually gear that you can get, and it was easy.
Yeah, it's not
but
too
all the
bad.
way up, I'm dreading it because of what I heard.
Right.
Now, if you're doing a first ascent,
you would have no idea, right?
So it's actually less scary to do first ascents because you don't know what you're getting into. And then when you get to something, you deal. I always tell people the first ascents, I've been on 40 expeditions, and I only once tried something that had been done before. Every other time it's been try the first ascent.
Right.
And the reason for that is, you're going to spend that time and money and energy, and you buy the plane ticket to go someplace, you might as well try something. And the reason I got into climbing is I wanted to explore. And the things is you can make a reputation for yourself pretty easily by doing obscure first ascents. And first of all, it's far less embarrassing to fail on a first ascent than to fail on a climb that's already been done. Secondly, people think, oh, my God, a first ascent, and it can get some credibility even if it's not very hard. And if you make it real obscure so nobody can find it, it'll never get a second ascent.
Right. And then it'll have a reputation.
Right.
And maybe warranted, maybe unwarranted.
Maybe not.
Right.
Well, I can't remember exactly where that starts, but it's
5982. Or whatever, a 5982, water ice, whatever.
But if you get there and you do the first pitch, and you can do the first pitch, it must not be the route I did.
Right. Clearly. Well, let me ask you a little bit different question.
Yeah.
From the one about like what keeps drawing you back to mountains. Let's go back to the beginning. What drew you to climbing and to mountains in the first place?
Well, people, they'll ask me, they'll say, "Where did you grow up?" My answer is, I didn't. But I was raised in Philadelphia. Well, I said I didn't grow up. I'm a climber. What the hell? But I was raised in Philadelphia, and my father was a history professor, and he got me reading books on exploration. And I read a lot of books on exploration as a kid. And here I am, a kid in Philadelphia. I was born in 1943. Mm-hmm. In 1953, I didn't know anything about climbing. We would go down to the Jersey Shore for vacations, and there were no mountains around. But I remember hearing that Hillary and Tenzing climbed the first ascent of Everest. And I remember thinking, damn, I wanted to be the first. I was 10 years old. And so I was reading these books about exploration. I always wanted to be an explorer, but I thought, it's 1950. It's all been explored. And I found that when I finally did get into climbing, it was a way of fulfilling my exploratory urge on a microcosmic way. I could be somewhere no one's ever been before, even if it was just a ridge on a mountain. I could sleep somewhere where no one has ever slept before. I could put my hands into a crack where no hand has ever gone before. But that came later. I wasn't really thinking about that. I just was really into exploring.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to college, and I went on a track scholarship. I was a middle distance runner. And a summer after my freshman year, I was coming back from the Poconos, which are where they're called mountains in Pennsylvania, with some friends late at night, and I fell asleep and hit a bridge, and two of my friends were killed in the car accident. I was the driver. I was knocked out by the accident, but not badly injured. So I was 19 years old. I felt horrible about it, so I quit school and joined the Army. I get in the Army, and at that time, so now that I've joined the Army, I want to do something interesting. And there was something that had just been developed in the last few years. It was Special Forces, the Green Berets, counterinsurgency. So I applied for that, and I got into Special Forces, and I became a member of a Special Forces A detachment, 12-man unit that did the real stuff. And we were in North Carolina at Fort Bragg, 1964, training for a special mission in Africa, our 12-man team, and we had two British SAS guys training with us. That British SAS was their equivalent to Special Forces. And we're back, I think, in the Linville Gorge area in North Carolina where nobody really climbed then. And one day we woke up and these two Brits had put up a top rope on a cliff. First time I ever been on a rope. And I spent the afternoon top roping in a little remote cliff somewhere near Linville Gorge in North Carolina. And I go, wow, this is really neat. And I had a natural feel for the rock climbing. The Brits said, hey, you could be a good climber. And I just kind of filed that away. And 2 years later, when I got out of the Army, went back to school, I said, I'm going to check out climbing, and went on the World Wide Web. No, I didn't do that. But I got into climbing then and changed my life.
Where did you go to school? Where did you go back when you went?
LaSalle University in Philadelphia, where my father was a professor at that school. And it took me a few years to graduate because I started taking time off to go climbing. And I started in the Schwangunks, and then I ended up migrating to the Tetons, and I never looked back.
Right. Kind of an interesting contrast to think about being in the Army.
Yeah.
This regimented world, and then like stepping into the world of climbers, which, at that time would have been real counterculture, bohemian kind of thing. Was that interesting to you, or did you bring your training from the Army into the way you approach
I was in
climbing?
a very special outfit.
Right.
We were allowed to grow our hair a little longer. We were a 12-man A detachment, operational detachment. We had this incredible camaraderie. We went on a couple of missions together, and then it was the early years of Vietnam, and I made sergeant, and I was getting ready at the end of my 3-year enlistment, and my team was getting ready to be sent to Vietnam, and they asked me to extend my enlistment to go and to make me a staff sergeant. And I thought, God, I had such a camaraderie with these guys, I almost did it.
Right.
But I decided in the last minute to go back to school. They went to Vietnam, but they ended up going to Laos, Cambodia, and 3 of them were killed out of 12. And, they were highly intelligent. It wasn't your average grunt. To get into Special Forces, it's more, you have to pass 3 or 4 tests on your mental acuity and your problem-solving ability. That's how you got in. Right. So we had, and it was a disparate group of people. One guy had was going to Cornell Law School, and he was getting ready to get drafted. And he said instead of getting drafted, he joined because he wanted to get into something interesting. We had a neat group of people, and my time with Special Forces really helped my alpine climbing because I learned a few things. I learned the importance of preparation, of strategic training. Looking at the goal, the objective, and figuring out the best way to approach it. And then figuring out the preparation you needed to do in terms of the equipment, the training you needed to do. But most importantly, what I learned was the importance of partnerships. The reason we had such camaraderie is because the 12 people on that team watched each other's backs. They were really, you trusted everybody on your team. You trained with them. And you knew that, for example, in climbing, alpine climbing, it's multi-day excursion, and you can't bring your A game out every day. Some days are bad days for you. So you want your partner, if you can't bring your A game, maybe they've got their A game and they can cover for you. So I have learned that, I tell young climbers, they ask me, what are the most important things about becoming an alpine climber? I say, well, number one, you got to buy the plane ticket. You got to commit. And number two, you have to be able to embrace failure because, a lot of times you're not going to get up, but you live to come back and try it again. And number three, the most important thing is your partner. I've been climbing for half a century, and I've guided for Exum Guide Service. I've mentored a lot of young climbers. I've done seminars on crack climbing. I've climbed with hundreds, maybe of thousands of people over the years. But when it comes to serious alpine climbing, over 50 years, I can count the number of partners I've had on the fingers of my two hands. Because the partnership in an alpine climb is the most critical and important thing. You want somebody that's going to cover for you or be with you, and you want somebody that has about the same level of commitment. You don't want somebody that's going to, when you know that you can keep going, want to go down, but then you don't want somebody to, it's a fine line between, if you don't really push hard in alpine climbing, you don't get up.
Right.
But if you push too hard, you don't come back.
Right.
So where is that line? I don't know where it is, but so far I've been able to.
Well, it depends on the climb, certainly.
Yeah, and I've had times when my partner and I both decided, well, it's time to go down. And it was probably the right thing to do. But we pushed hard.
Right. Yeah, and the argument that can happen when one person either doesn't have the commitment or is maybe a little overstoked to keep going is probably a difficult thing as well.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and also with, I feel like I was thinking about while you're talking incidences where with my best partners where, we're both climbing along, and this is rock climbing, but like in the Black Canyon, somewhere gnarly like that,
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, man, I'm really scared, and like, I don't know if this is going to go that well, and I'm not vocalizing that, and he's not vocalizing it. But the moment I, break face, if you will, and be like, yeah, I'm pretty gripped. Like, I don't know if we have the time and everything else. My best partners, it's like, oh yeah, me neither. I was thinking the same thing a minute ago, and like, it's time to go down, versus like the argument that could ensue about, who's giving up too soon. But I just remember times where I'm just like, finally, like, I think this is not going great, and then instantly, oh yeah, me neither. I've been thinking that for the last 2 hours. Like, let's get out of here.
You want your partner to be on the same line level that you are. Not only in the ability, but in commitment and everything.
Yeah, and understand when you're being serious, as opposed to like that you need some pep talk or like need a little more.
Yeah, in alpine climbing, you also want somebody you can live with for a while,
right?
Yeah, you could spend a lot of time down days in a tent, staring at counting the number of little squares on the ripstop. The storm pelts down above you, and you want somebody that's fun to be with in base camp, and that.
So if you had a moment here to like, give a shout out to who the best you've had are, who are we talking about?
My climbing partners?
Yeah.
Well, it started with my early days in Patagonia with John Bragg and Jay Smith on Torrieger, and then I had a long partnership with Jack Tackle in Alaska and other places, and then George Lowe, Jeff Lowe, Michael Kennedy,
Right.
and those have been, and then Greg Crouch later on in life when I met him when he's 24 years younger. We formed a great partnership and did a bunch of stuff in Patagonia and Alaska. And a younger guy, Tom Engelbach, that I've climbed with. And those are some of my partners. And maybe I'm forgetting. So Malcolm Daly. And, there's just a few people.
Right.
And I'm still... They're not all still here. Most of them are because they've had some pretty good judgment, and I'm still friends with all of them. And that's another important thing. Life's tough enough,
Right.
And one of the things that makes life easier is real friendships. And you want a partnership where it ends up being, hopefully, you get up a climb. But most importantly is that you're friends after it.
Right. Yeah.
You're
Come
not
home
bitter
friends,
about
right.
the situation.
Right. The what about you mentioned earlier having to start recruiting younger guys and girls to do some of these climbs with. Who's impressed you, more recently in your career that you've teamed up with?
Well, I've teamed up with.
Or even if you haven't teamed up with them, but you're just you know how they climb and what they're like in the mountains.
There was a period of time when I was like in my 50s, and there seemed like that there was a period of time where the emphasis in America was on the new found sport climbing.
Sure.
And it seemed like younger climbers weren't really getting into alpine climbing, and the alpine climbing was being done by the old guys who were getting older every year. And I thought, and then all of a sudden, this new wave hit this, and we've got so many good young alpine climbers now, and unfortunately, it's been a bad few years for some of them. Hayden Kennedy and a number of other people that have come to grief. Kyle Dempster, Scott Adamson. Right. And, they go on, and look what just happened with Jesse Roskelly. And what's happening now too, of course, is that climbers are better than ever because they know how to train more. And actually, there's more climbers, and it's more democratic. When I got into climbing in the 60s, climbing was largely, in America, a university thing. And usually the elite universities, the Ivy League, Stanford, Berkeley, had outdoor clubs, and that's where all the climbers came from. And they all went to the same places, the Schwangunks, and then you went to the Tetons, and of course there was Yosemite. And now, with the advent of the climbing gyms, it's democratized climbing. It's opened up climbing to a lot of different groups of people. People that never would have gotten into climbing because they didn't go to university and go to an outing club, getting into climbing now. Some of them are great athletes. And so I on the one hand, a lot of my friends are curmudgeons. And they go to Indian Creek, how crowded it is now. And even the Black Canyon is getting more crowded. And yeah, that's happening. I don't begrudge it though. How can you begrudge, just make it work. Because to me, yeah, climbing's more crowded, it's harder to get camping, but I still can find remote places in the world where I can be by myself if I want to. And I've loved climbing so much. It's been so important to me for so much of my life that I'm not going to begrudge someone else getting into climbing and making it a little bit more crowded for me.
You just brought up Indian Creek, and for me, just being a rock climber for the most part, like that place is a place where in my career, it's a place where I've climbed sort of steadily the longest and watched a place change. Talking about being a curmudgeon. Yeah. And I wasn't there in the very earliest days, but since the early 90s to now. So I've witnessed year after year the change. Some places I've climbed a long time ago and then I haven't been back, or I haven't been back incrementally to watch it. One place I was thinking about that with you is Patagonia.
Yeah.
Having a house down there, having climbed there steadily since the 70s. So let's talk about a little bit about your relationship with Patagonia.
All right. Well,
when it
Patagonia,
started and you know how it's continued over the years.
Okay, so I got into climbing largely because, well, my experience with Special Forces but once I got into it, I found that it fulfilled my exploratory urge to be someplace no one's ever been before, if only it's on a new route somewhere. And I got to the Tetons early on, and I ended up, climbing guide for excellence for about 7 or 8 years. But I started climbing in the Tetons, and I met some climbers then who were better rock climbers, and I thought, well, I better develop my rock climbing. So I went to Boulder, Colorado, and worked a little bit on El Dorado, and then I gravitated to Yosemite. And I really, I had a natural feel for crack climbing, and when I got there in 1970, it was the so-called Golden Age era was over, the big wall era, and now the new emphasis was on hard free climbing, relatively speaking. First 511s were going in, and I was a part of that revolution of doing the harder free climbs. This is before cams, and they're primarily on cracks, and it was on granite. And then I started reading about this place in Mountain Magazine that had these beautiful pictures of this towers, Patagonia. And I could see that it reminded me of the kind of, I figured, well, I'm a pretty good granite crack climber now, and it looks like that's what you need to do to climb down there. So I went to Patagonia. First time I was invited by a British team, Rab Carrington, Peter Minks, Alan Rouse, who I'd climbed with in Yosemite. And I got down there with them, but we had problems with logistics and never really got to climb. And the next year I went down with John Bragg, and we almost did the first ascent of Cerro Stanhart. And then I went down the next year with John Bragg and Jay Wilson. We did do the first ascent of Torrey Egger. And in those days, when you went to the Fitzroy Torrey Massif, you were in a wilderness. It was hard to get to it. The roads were dirt, and there was no bridges across the rivers. You would drive up to one of the rivers in like the Santa Cruz River and wait for a little car ferry to bring you across. And then when you got into the end of the road ended, there was no bridge across the Rio Fitzroy. And now there's a bridge there on the other side of that, on a big field, is El Chaltén.
Right.
When I first went there, that field was completely vacant. Not a single house. There were a few small estancias nearby, and they didn't build on this field because there's two valleys that come down to it. It's a natural wind tunnel. It's not hospitable. And we had to wait across the Rio Fitzroy every time we went into the mountains, and we camped back in the mountains. It was a wilderness. And I was there for 3 months working on Torrey Egger because the weather was so bad. And during that time, we didn't see a single other climbing team, and then we had 2 German trekkers came in over a 3-month period, only 2. Now there's hundreds and hundreds every day. So that has changed. El Chaltén now, I call it the Chamonix of Patagonia. And I haven't been there for several years. Where we have our house is a little bit north on the east side of the North Patagonia ice cap. I call it undiscovered Patagonia. It's still not like the old days, but there's still a lot of little remote valleys you can go back into. You'd be the first person into those valleys. So what I do there now is more exploring with climbing at the end. But the exploring is almost more important than the actual climb.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, I remember I was in Indian Creek in 2014. I know it was 2014 because of what this woman said. And she had been climbing, I can't remember who it was, but she'd been climbing in El Chaltén, where people go down and they rent rooms and they all hang out together. She said, "What do you think of El Chaltén?" I go, "Well, it's okay, but I really kind of liked it when there was nobody there. It was wilderness." And I said, "Now you got to even have discos." And she looked at me and she said, "Jim, it's 2014. We called them clubs." But what I do now in the last couple of years, I had this young guy, Tad McRae, that he's 42 years younger than me, and he's my primary climbing partner in Patagonia. And the last few years, he's come down after guiding on Aconcagua, and I've got a mountain picked out, and I've found the way in, and we go in and do a first ascent to these little mountains, little granitic peaks, and then the biggest problem is getting to them and finding a way in.
Right.
We did one called Cerro Chueco a couple years ago. Beautiful little 9 pitches of climbing up to about 510. But glacier travel to get to it, and rainforest to get to the glacier, and it's just spectacular. You get to the peak, no one's ever been on it before. You can see it from the road, from the Carretera Austral, but no one had ever figured out. Well, there's no climbing pressure up there,
Right.
And when we got to the top on a perfect day, a condor is circling above us, and we're looking out into wilderness area that no one's ever been. I thought, it doesn't get much better than this. But here's a funny story about Tad. In 1976, I did Torrieger, and I wrote published an article in National Geographic about the climb. And I was a young, impecunious climber, and didn't have a real job. I was working as a guide. So I thought I'd go around the western United States and do some slideshows to make some money. So I got a list of all these retail stores around the country, and I made phone calls. And I called up this guy, Mick Mead, who was the owner of what became a chain of stores in the San Diego, L.A. area called A16. And he said, "Sure, I'll do a slideshow with you. Why don't we do one in I'm opening up a new store in San Diego. You can be my entertainment." So I said, okay. And I show up in San Diego, and he's grand opening. So he... because of that, he did a lot of advertising, and people were showing up in droves. I ended up with about 500 people. It was outdoor sitting. So he had his beautiful young daughter. She was 16, and I'm going, oh, my gosh, she's a striking girl. And he had her setting up chairs, bringing up more chairs because of all the people who were showing up for the slideshow. Well, that beautiful young 16-year-old is Tad McRae's mother.
Right.
Probably went down.
There you go. That's a generational gap then.
Yeah. And not too long ago, I was doing the Evolution Traverse with a 22-year-old from Europe, and George Lowe, and this 22-year-old, and he had his 46-year-old father, and he was a very strong guy. They'd done on cap together. We're doing the Evolution Traverse together. And he goes, "Jim, you're old enough to be my dad's dad." And I said, "Ben, your grandmother never told you about me?" I love climbing with really young climbers because I love their enthusiasm. Well, Tad McRae, he's a big guy. He's a big, strong guy. He was a rower on the 8 sculling team from the University of Washington, won the national championship. I mean, he's 6'3" and it's all muscle. His nickname is Too Big to Fail.
Right.
And I love his enthusiasm. He reminds me of me 40 years ago. We'll get into the rainforest, and I get some of my older friends, and they get into the rainforest, and they go, this is horrible, And he gets in there and he go, "Hey, this is kind of neat, And I think that climbing with, for me, with real young people that are as young as my grandchildren, I can mentor them a little bit with some words of wisdom, but they really, re-energize me. They kind of charge my battery,
right?
And I love their enthusiasm, and that's why I've never been I don't think I'm a curmudgeon. Because I appreciate, people, some old time climbers go, "Well, it's not like it used to be. It's, oh my God," No, it's not like it used to be. It's different a little bit, but that doesn't mean it's worse or better, or it's different. When you think about life, the only thing that really never changes is the fact that things will change.
Right.
And you better be able to adjust to it, or you're going to be unhappy.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about that Torrieger climb.
Yeah.
It's kind of the first on the list of when you look up Jim Donini.
Yeah.
And it was a significant climb. And is that the one where you were following part of Maestri's line.
Yes.
His supposed line.
Yes.
So I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about your sort of involvement in that controversy in terms of what you guys found up there.
So
because we had Kelly on when his book came out.
Well, I got John Bragg to go down with me, and I think it was 1974. And the magazine that was really the credible magazine in the world then was Mountain Magazine out of England.
Mm-hmm.
Ken Wilson was the editor, and they were all of a sudden it's all about Patagonia and these beautiful towers. I mean, the pictures are incredible. You go, oh my God. So we decided to go down there, and we went down, and I'd done a lot of reading as much as possible. And we knew that there's 3 Tories together, Cerro Torre, Torre Egger, and Cerro Stanhart in a line. And we knew that the Cerro Torre had been climbed, but it turns out in a very controversial way. But that's Torre Egger and in the middle, and Cerro Stanhart were unclimbed. And Cerro Stanhart in the end was the smaller of the 3. And we decided to try that. And we would have made the first ascent, but a stove went bad, and we couldn't melt snow and get water, and we had to go down and wasted 2 days and got back and just got to the summit ridge as the storm was coming in. So we didn't make it, but we almost did. But during that time, as you're hiking into the cirque, at the base of, you go underneath Cerro Torre towards Torre Egger, Cerro Stanhart. I was hiking up that one day with a British friend of mine, and it was kind of a stormy day, and all of a sudden I looked over and I saw a fox. And we're miles from the nearest blade of grass, we're on a glacier, and there's a fox. So I went over to check out why it was there, and he was eating these remains. It turned out that was the body of Tony Egger. He had disappeared when he was with Maestri in 1959 at the base of the climb. His body was covered up with snow, and here it was 16 years later. He had come in the glacier downhill a couple thousand vertical feet and several kilometers, and where the glacier flattened out, he melted out, and the fox was eating his remains. And I went, oh my God. So we took the remains and we buried them under some rocks. And I took a carabiner from his body and went home, and I thought, let's do Torre Egger, which was the mountain next to Cerro Torre. It means Egger's Tower. It was named after Tony Egger after he died. And at that time, there was a big controversy about the 1959 climb with Maestri and Egger. Mountain Magazine, under Ken Wilson's direction, were saying he simply could not have done it. Because the storm that they were in, the quality, the difficulty of the climbing, Egger and Maestri were up for 6 days in a storm, and they came back down, and Egger was killed on a descent. Maestri said that his body was hit by an ice avalanche, and he just fell to the glacier. And by the time Maestri got to the glacier, it was snowing. His body was covered. He was rescued by his support team. He was nearly dead. But he said that, yeah, they did the mountain. They did the climb. But Mountain Magazine said, no, they couldn't have, especially when Maestri came back in 1970 or 71 with a huge team and did the compressor route and used the pneumatic bolt gun and bolted, put hundreds of bolts in. And so they said, well, why would a guy who did this more difficult route on Cerro Torre with one other partner in complete alpine style, and if they had done that in 1959, it would have been the most amazing climb in the history of climbing.
Yeah,
given the state of the art of climbing in 1959 and the amount of the equipment they had. So why would he come back in years later and do it in a completely different style? Anyway, Maestri, Donini, he's Italian. I said, hey, the guy's a good guy. He probably did it. And, Maestri also had done a lot of climbing in Dolomite, and he was a good climber.
Right.
So it turns out that the people that have, and you've got to believe climbers because there's not always photographic evidence, and so you trust somebody. So I went down there thinking that Maestri and Egger had climbed Cerro Torre. And we noticed that they did their line. They went to the Col of Conquest, which is the col between Cerro Torre and Torre Egger. So our thought was, well, we'll just climb their line to the Col of Conquest, and then when we get to the Col, instead of doing Cerro Torre, we'll do Torre. And that's what we did. And the first 1,000 feet, the about 2,500 vertical feet to the Col, and it's in 3 sections. There's a 1,000-foot really steep section, then a triangular-shaped ice field, then a lower angle section up to a corner, and then a traverse from that corner into the Col. And from below, it looks like the first section is going to be hard because it's steep. The second section going up to the corner is going to be easier because it's lower angle. And then you look at from below, the 400-foot traverse into the Col looks blank, and it looks really hard. And you're thinking, well, they did it, and we're Yosemite climbers. You know, we can. It must be. And then Maestri said that when he got to the traverse, it was difficult artificial aid, and we can do that.
Sure.
So it was like following history. The first 1,000 feet up to the triangular-shaped ice field, it was there was all these remnants, pieces of rope, wooden wedges and cracks, a boulder or two, a piton, artifacts. There must have been 100 artifacts from their climb. They left all the stuff behind, ropes hanging there. And for young climbers like us, you know, who are in awe of our predecessors, we thought, my God, this is like being in a history museum. And we got to that end of that 1,000-foot section right below the snow field, the ice field, just as a storm was coming in. And we noticed there was a ledge there, and there were some packs buried, and we chopped a little bit, and it was like an equipment dump. And we wrapped off. And we didn't get, the weather that year was really bad. We didn't get back on the climb for 6 weeks. We started thinking about it, though. The last pitch going up to the equipment dump was a totally fixed rope. And there was a lot of pitons they aided it. And about every other piton, there was a carabiner, and the rope was clove hitched to the carabiner. And I thought, you know, what's that all about? It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, we finally get back up there. And then we go from there all the way to the Col of Conquest. And after 1,000 feet with all those artifacts, all the way from that point, another 1,800 vertical feet to the Col, zero. Nothing.
Right.
Not even a rappel anchor. And that is pretty strong evidence that no one had been there. But what made it more conclusive to me was he described it as it looks like from below, like the second section from the Col, from their high point to the traverse into the Col was going to be easier. It was actually kind of hard. You know how granite slabs,
right. It's
not that easy. And then he said that the traverse into the Col, which from below looks blank. Well, we got to that corner, and we turned, and then we got around the corner, and we looked. There was a hidden ledge system going into the Col. You had a few hard moves of free climbing, then you're on the ledge. It's fourth class. And he described it as very difficult, and you can't even see it until you're right on top of it.
Right.
So based on those things, I realized then that the Maestri had not only not climbed Cerro Torre in 1959, but they hadn't gotten to the Col of Conquest. That's my story.
Right. You went on that trip to climb Torre.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah.
Yeah, and we got to the Col, and we bivvied, and and a storm came in. And we were out in the open, and it was not so nice, and we had to retreat. We went back up later, and we got to the Col again. We right below the Col, when there's more shelter part, we put in, chopped out a ledge and put what was called a Willens box that they used on Everest, Don Willens designed, and that was our high point camp. And then from there, directly above the Col, Torre is overhanging rime ice. You can't climb it. So we traversed below the Col to the right where we got some overhanging granite. And I led that pitch. It took me 6 hours. It was the most difficult aid climbing I'd ever done. And I had to do a pendulum off a 3/4 inch angle, only a third of the way in, and finally lasso a flake. It was epic. And I left a fixed rope there. And then the next day we went back and Jumar'd up above that pitch and went to the summit, got to the summit in a storm, and came back down, and we got it done.
Right.
And it was definitely the hardest alpine climb I'd ever done. And Torre is still considered by most people to be the hardest peak in the Western Hemisphere to get to the top of. Yeah. It's sort of a seminal point of my climbing, and it was one of my first real alpine successes.
Mm-hmm. And what was the total time you were down there for that climb? I mean, what was the total amount of time you were in Patagonia for that climb?
3 months.
Yeah.
Because the weather was really horrendous. And we had a 6-week storm where we couldn't really climb.
Right.
And
a lot of time to think about the fixed line and the clove hitched. I
still don't understand that.
Right.
I mean, I'm never going to understand that. But we also saw right at their equipment dump a rope draped over a rock, around a rock, and cut halfway down, and was like, and it looked like the same diameter as the rope that I found on Tony Egger's body. But I don't know.
Right.
I'll never know what happened.
Well, and the thing about like all that information is that wasn't. I mean, you're like a third of the way up Cerro Torre at that point.
Right.
So they claim to have not only gotten to the Col. I mean, not at that point, at the Col Conquest. So, I mean, then whatever else they claim to do above that would have been even more difficult.
That was another part of it. Egger, Maestri said, well, you get to the Col Conquest, you can't see it from here, but there's a 60-degree ice runnel going to the summit, and my partner was the best ice climber in Europe, Tony Egger. Well, I got to the Col Conquest, and that 60-degree ice runnel just does not exist.
Right.
Barolo Garibaldi, and I went back finally and did that. And
like in the 90s or even the 2000s is a lot. I mean, it was years and years afterwards.
Yeah, when he first went back with Colin Haley, and it
was later than that. Then, if it was
and then they went back into the Torrey Traverse. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he was the first to climb ever Cerro Torrey out of the Col. And the climbing out of the Col to the summit is very difficult.
Right.
There is no 60-degree ice runnel hidden there. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, with modern equipment, it's very difficult.
Modern equipment is guys like Colin Haley, Rollo Garibaldi, brilliant climbers, barely get up it.
So what was your, I mean, at the time, if you came down and basically, told whoever was listening, like, we don't think that Maestri did it. I mean, what did it do to you personally in terms of, thinking about like the sort of code of honor in the mountains, this guy that maybe you had some respect for, I mean, it's kind of like, it sort of stole this very important ascent.
To me, it made it's like the exception that proves the rule.
Right.
And I realized there's been 3 or 4, there's only been a few that there were fabrications, and they were done by people who were well respected.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why they believed them. If Joe Blow went up there and said, well, I did that, and right.
Mm-hmm.
But a guy with his credentials, people believed him. And, I'm cynical by nature when it comes to the human species,
mm-hmm.
so-called intelligent ape. And I realize that there's always going to be that happening. But when re-examining the history of climbing and seeing how infrequent that is,
right.
I still believe that climbers have a code of honor, and I believe people when they say something. I believed Maestri. I found out he didn't, but that was such a rare exception that it almost solidifies the code of honor in my mind.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. And did you have when you found Tony Egger's body, which must have been just shocking and wild and kind of crazy.
Actually, we got really criticized when we found his body. He'd been there 19 years. 16 years, 17 years coming down the glacier, and he was broken up, and there was a boot with his fibula and tibula sticking out, and a rope and an old ice axe. And I thought, if I ever die in the mountains like that, I want my body to rest there. So we moved what we found. We didn't find everything, and buried it under some rocks and came out. Mm-hmm. And when word got back to Europe, he's from Austria.
Mm-hmm.
And Austria is a very Catholic country. And we were roundly criticized in the Austrian press. Why didn't you bring his body out for proper Christian interment?
Right.
never occurred to us. Never occurred. I'm a card-carrying atheist, but it never occurred to me. But that solidified my desire to want to climb Torrey Egger. I said, we come back next year. Let's do the real deal. Let's climb Torrey Egger in honor of this guy, Tony Egger. And I put his carabiner on the summit.
Oh, okay.
The summit's an ice mushroom. And I don't think anyone's ever seen that. It probably melted down into the ice. It'll be there for God knows how long.
You have a relationship with Michael Kennedy going way back to Laytok, and our close friends. What was did you weigh in, or did you have an expressed opinion about when Hayden and Jason Kruk chopped the compressor? It's kind of like weird, funny old news now.
To me, it was like a Greek tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that Hayden was being a brilliant rock climber, and then he started going to Patagonia. Julie, he really was hoping Hayden would just stick to rock climbing,
right?
Because that's pure rock climbing is a lot safer than alpine climbing, and she kind of blamed me for getting him to go to Patagonia. I talked to him a couple of times, but not really. I mean, that's
like blaming you for a wave hitting the beach.
Well,
like
hey Jim,
yeah.
Why'd you talk to him about Patagonia? And he became a brilliant alpinist. Now look at the Laytok Cirque. I told you about the three most magnificent 7,000 meter peaks in the world are right next to each other in terms of technical difficulty, and Laytok 1, Ogre 2, Ogre. Now, those three peaks from the north side, from the Laytok side, have been tried by world-class climbing teams, the three of them together, probably 50 times, and with no successes. Only one. And that was a new route done by Kyle Dempster and Hayden Kennedy on that side of the Ogre a few years ago. So he became this brilliant alpinist, and I know that both Michael and Julie were, oh my gosh, that's such a dangerous venue. And then the next year or two later, Kyle Dempster disappears on the north face of Ogre 2. And Hayden had fallen in love and of a brilliant young woman rock climber, and Mutha Bozeman. They set up house together and decided he was going to retire from world-class alpinism. And I know Michael and Julie were very happy about that. And then to have this tragic thing happen, the crazy, tragic circumstances of the death and the avalanche. I lost a son, by the way. He was 20 years old in an accident. And so I'm one of those parents in the world, around the world, not the many of us, thank God, who have lost children. So I can really relate to losing my son Montana at the age of 20, and then losing Hayden, her only son. He was such a brilliant climber, but not only, more than that, a brilliant young man, thoughtful, talented. Anybody would die to have a son like that. And I went to the memorial and I talked to, and of course, Michael and Julie knew that I'd lost my son. And I said, it's something that shouldn't happen to a parent. We're supposed to go before they go. But life isn't fair. Life is just what it is. And you have to deal, and and I was honest with them, and I said, it's not going to go away. It'll lessen with time. So my son would be 35, 36 now, and I sometimes think, now I'd probably be, taking care of the grandkids. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to ever happen for me. It's not going to happen for them. But, the one thing that Michael and Julie have is because of the people they are, they have an incredible support group because they're such fine people. And that's important. That's really important that you have people to fall back on, people that you care about and that you trust. And they do. It's not going to ever be easy, but it does. The pain, becomes less sharp with time. But there's no answers. And then people will say, well, in Hayden's case, he wasn't climbing, he was skiing. And like Kyle Dempster and Scott Adamson, I know they were young in their mid-30s and they were climbing, and people go, what a waste. Why do people put themselves into this position? And I have an answer for that. I really don't. And then, some of the things they're saying I find kind of trite.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least they're doing something they love. And they were doing something, that I don't like that answer. It's like when there's ever a gun massacre, they say, well, thoughts and prayers.
Mm-hmm.
The three worst words in the English language, we'll give our thoughts and prayers. That's bullshit. And I don't have answers for these things. And I wouldn't be able to really comfort a parent when their son died climbing. I'd say, well, they wanted to do it, and they did it, and a bad thing happened, and that's part of life.
Right.
And if I die climbing, I'm going to die, but probably, I don't know. I have no answer.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned, your death and your survival in a way. I mean, we kind of started somewhere around there in terms of talking about luck and talking about what it takes to get through the mountains and the luck part of it being a big part of that. And we talked a little bit about age. Is it something that you think about in terms of I mean, you must think about it in terms of coming eventually to the end of your career and then the end of your life?
Probably the hardest thing for human beings is to face mortality.
Sure.
And that's what separates us from other animals, and I'm sure that I don't think most other species. We're just an animal. We're a species of ape, but we're probably separated because we know that we're mortal. I think that most animals don't really realize that, and I think that's why that's one of the reasons why we have religion. Because, hey, there's got to be something beyond just spending a short time on this planet and then you're gone, and so humankind has come up with religion as an answer. Oh, yeah, but then you go to heaven and blah, blah, blah. Well, sitting on a cloud playing a harp doesn't appeal to me, but if I was a Mormon, even having my own planet when I die doesn't appeal to me. Like I said, I'm an atheist. I was raised Catholic, but the cynical part of me, I just can't find the evidence for religion. But I know I'm going to die, and it could be in the mountains, probably not. I never worry about dying in the mountains. It never occurs to me. I never really think about it. Sometimes when I'm in situations like on Lake Talk, or I've been in situations where I'm thinking, oh, this isn't good. Now, we might not survival is not assured.
Right.
But I never go into a climb thinking that.
Right.
And I think more that I think about now about my own end of my life is the end of my climbing. I did 4,000 vertical feet yesterday, 2 days ago with boots on hard snow. And so I'm still performing okay, aerobically for my age. And I can still climb decently for my age. And so I can still do this. But I'm a realist. I know that I'll be turned 76 during the climb. And well, wait a minute. There aren't too many more years. Mm-hmm. My wife Angela found an old the college I went to, LaSalle University, a number of years ago when I was 38. They tracked me down and interviewed me, and she read the interview, and I was 38 years old, and I remember saying in the interview, well, I'm 38. I'll probably give this up by the time I'm 40, 45. 35 years later, 37 years later, I'm still doing it. Well, you have to be physically able to do it, and you have to have the desire. So, I've mentioned the fact that I stayed in shape because I haven't been injured and I haven't had joint issues. So I've been able to maintain the physical attributes you need to climb, but I've also maintained the desire to do it.
Right.
And that's a motivational thing that not everybody has, and I can't explain that.
So to finish up, looking back, we throw around this word lifer with folks who climb their entire lives. I mean, you're definitely, like you said, the barometer in a lot of ways for that. So
I had barometers for me.
Yeah. So if you could sort of sum it up, I mean, what do you think the gifts or the, looking back, the positives that climbing gave you for, I mean, how long have you been climbing? 60 years? When did you start?
No, well, 1964.
Right.
55 years.
Yeah. So, if someone said, well, why did you spend all this time? And, maybe someone really cynical said, you wasted your life just like climbing mountain after mountain. What are the gifts that you see came out of it for you?
It's kept me healthy. I think about when people worry about the dangers of climbing, the biggest danger you have in longevity is not being healthy by falling into a situation where you eat too much, drink too much, and don't exercise. And you're far more likely to die young from doing that. Or, I look around at people my age who are riding around a retail store in carts with an oxygen bottle or, barely able to walk up a hill. It's not only how long you live, it's the quality of your life. And to me, part of the quality of my life is to have the physical part of me as well as the mental part. And I wouldn't want to be a sedentary, out-of-shape person that's just sitting in front of a TV watching baseball games. So it's the quality of life. Now, but more important than that, I explained the exploratory urge. I'm still exploring, going to places. I did a new climb with George Lowe in Patagonia last year, and it was a really beautiful approach that no one had ever really done before, and the peak had done before. We did a new route on it, an easy route. It was easy. And we got to the top, and I had a little urn of ashes from Jim Bridwell that Peggy Bridwell gave me. This is a few months ago. So she wanted me to spread those ashes in Patagonia. So here are the top of this little route that we did. And I'm just getting ready to, in fact, I went like that with the ashes, and George Lowe took a photo. You can see the ashes coming out. Right before I did that, a condor flew underneath with the white top of its wings flashing in the sun. And then I let the ashes go. And, of course, Bridwell's nickname was the bird, and I thought that was super appropriate. But that reminds me, it's the people that I've climbed with and the friendships that I've had and still have with people over a half century. It's the most important thing. A guy, my friend Dirk he lives in Bozeman now, just the other day, he's quite a bit younger, but he's, moving on in age. And he said, when I first started climbing, it was what I climbed. Then it became, as I got a little bit older, where it was. Now it's who I'm with, and that's part of it. The bond, the camaraderie that I first noticed with the Special Forces A team has continued on with my Alpine partners, and it's become a very special thing. And that's probably one of the things that's kept my motivation.
Well, awesome, Jim. Thanks a lot for sitting down.
It was fun.
Yeah, this has been tremendous for me to talk to you and get to know you. We've sort of orbited one another for years, at least down in the creek and in the rock climbing.
Well, good.
World.
I enjoyed this. Thanks a lot for putting it together, Chris.
Yeah, and good luck on your trip this summer. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll give you a blow by blow when I get back.
Oh, cool. Sounds good, Jim.
Okay.
Thanks again.
You bet.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Jim for sitting down. Man, in 55 years, a lot of highs and lows. I think that those lows, frankly, might have killed a lesser person. So I think it's a testament to Jim's spirit that not only has he kept going, stayed positive, stayed motivated, not become a curmudgeon, which is nice and maybe surprising. Hell, I'm more than halfway there, and he's got 20-some years on me. Anyway, pretty heavy chat there in the end. I hope you guys were there with us in the depths. But now I'm really hoping to run into Jim in the creek this fall. I think you guys probably are too, actually, so look for him. Okay, remember you can help out the Enormocast by going to enormocast.com and clicking on the Help Out tab. seeing what you can do to further the empire 8 years on. Still needs furthering. Still are lands to be conquered. So help me out with that. Reviews, liking the Facebook page, stuff like that. Easy stuff. You can also donate to the podcast at the website at enormocast.com if you feel the urge. Urges pretty much carry this whole thing. Urges. All right, when you're out there climbing this fall, as September is finally starting to cool off here. Is it cooling off where you live? Anyway, don't forget the urge to check your knots.
You come far, pilgrim.
Feels like far.
Were it worth the trouble?
What trouble?
The teachers told me that's where it's at. So